I had some students who gave me a stack of 10 books and they said, hey, can we make a little tiny library of LGBTQ books because we think it's good for people's mental health? And I encouraged them to apply for a grant. So they asked for $400. The grant makers were so impressed with these kids that they responded and said, ask for more. And so the kids asked for $9,987 and they got it. And that grant not only bought $4,000 in books, but it actually helped them have a queer rural youth summit in Kentucky. Their school rejected their books, but a local art center said, we'll take them. And so then we asked on GoFundMe for just $400 more so that if anyone ever wanted a book and they weren't within walking distance, they could have it mailed. GoFundMe itself noticed the GoFundMe, topped it off, and then contacted the media. We ended up having 7 different media spots about this. We ended up raising thousands of dollars. And what's great about all of this is it was some students who said, here are $15 worth of books. Can we start a little library?
Welcome, everyone. Today on Always Learning, I'm chatting with 2 very special guests, Adrienne Quinn Martin and Willie Carver Jr., both powerful advocates on EdPost and beyond. Before we jump into the conversation, I'd like to give each of you an opportunity to tell us a little bit about yourself, your path to advocacy, and a little bit about what you're working on right now. So, Adrienne, why don't we start with you?
I am Adrienne Quinn Martin. I've been working with EdPost for, I think, over 2 years now. I got involved with EdPost and education through my community. My local school board had started book banning in 2022, specifically LGBTQ books. And I was already our county Democratic chair. I live in a really red rural county in Texas. So I was already advocating for kind of progressive causes. And when I started talking about the book banning and talking at school board meetings, some of it got some media attention. And since then, I've kind of been a go-to book banning person, but I wouldn't say it's my altogether, expertise. I kind of have my hands in a lot of different pots, and right now really trying to get out the vote and working on getting some good people elected in Texas and in the entire country.
Wonderful. Thank you. And Willie, how about you?
Hi. So I'm Willie Carver. I was the Kentucky Teacher of the Year in 2022. Before that point, I was a classroom teacher whose job was sort of to say, okay, there are powerful people doing terrible things, and I'm going to work within those parameters to try to help our students as much as possible. And we were, as Adrienne School was doing, we were facing book bans. We were facing targeted elimination of Black and brown voices, queer programming, and becoming Teacher of the Year for the first time in my life put me in a position where I was able to articulate what was happening, and I realized people actually really care. And we do not have to just work within the system that is being created. We can create the system ourselves. And so the last couple of years have been spent doing just that, creating libraries, talking about censorship, creating programming to talk about the sorts of things that are happening. I work with the Kentucky Youth Law Project, and we offer legal aid, advice, and assistance to LGBTQ youth under the age of 25 in Kentucky. But naturally, that for me has also spread to talking to students about their civil rights across the state. And I'm also an author, and so I spend a lot of time writing about, for me, the politics of innocence. Because these conversations are really about who gets to be innocent, who doesn't get to be innocent, and how we presuppose guilt for certain books, ethnicities, sexualities, genders, and how we can start changing those conversations.
Wonderful. Well, thank you both for taking the time to be here with me today, especially during your very busy season. Right now, I know you both have very packed schedules, and this week is an interesting week for many reasons, and one is that it's Banned Books Week. And I don't know if we say that we celebrate Banned Books Week, but at least we acknowledge every year as this week passes the number of books that have been banned over time, or there have been some objection to the book over time. And PEN America has found this year that there are 10,000 or more instances of book bans, like more than the last school year. So it seems to be increasing. And that really does track with the politics of the time. I honestly was hoping to see that it was decreasing. We haven't heard as much about it, but that's not the case. And we haven't heard about education a lot in the election cycle thus far. But some claim that the blueprint for the Trump administration is Project 2025. And that is all but set up to all but eliminate freedom to read in many schools, if not beyond. And it's mostly targeting books with LGBTQIA themes, or those that take as their subject matter people of color, or which are written by people of color. So that's largely where they are targeted. With regard to the LGBT books, if teachers or librarians are found with those texts in their curriculum materials or in their libraries, Project 2025 would have teachers prosecuted and would even have them on sex offender registries, just by virtue of having those materials available for kids who are curious or questioning and needed some more information. Those things that are available to them now, because they would no longer be covered under First Amendment protections. Sounds pretty dangerous. So I'm curious at this point. We each live in a fairly conservative state. I'm from Pennsylvania. Willie, you're in Kentucky, and Adrienne in Texas. And I want to say, Adrienne, I'm not sure if you knew this, but I looked up some facts this morning. Do you know that Texas is number 1 for most banned books? You hit the top spot. Pennsylvania came in number 6. And I was trying to find a number for Kentucky, and it seems like Kentucky is doing better than we are. There wasn't a real solid number, but I was seeing some numbers for 100 books banned recently in one particular county. So they're working hard to get up on the chart. So I'd like to just take a minute and talk about where are we in terms of book banning and the current state of affairs in our respective states. So whoever would like to start, Adrienne, you.
Well, in Texas, last legislative session, our legislature meets every other year. They passed kind of a book banning law, basically, that enshrined book banning into law to protect the schools that want to partake it, or not even protect it, demand that the schools remove books. Now it's all caught up in court, and it has been since it passed. Texas has a really bad situation with our legislature. We've got an extremist minority controlling, the second most populated state in the country. I don't think that most Texans agree with these laws, but there's not a super awareness, I think, by just the general public that they're even happening. So, like I said, that law, it's TDB. They're also going after the book. Maybe y'all know the word. It's like the wholesalers. Like I said, I'm not an educator, so I'm just, it's whoever they buy the book distributors. I know that they've been targeting them because when schools buy these books, they buy them in bulk. So they're trying to prohibit them from, or I think certain distributors, they're trying to kind of blackball them out of the business. And they've been doing that for a while. I don't really know where that's at right now. I can give you a little bit of hope locally. In 2022, my school district made headlines. We were one of the first in the country that started this new wave, what I call the new wave of book banning, because we know that it's gone on and off throughout history. And the community was kind of, they were either supporting the book banning because of the messaging that was being put out, And those of us that were countering that messages were kind of getting shouted down, like, oh, you want porn in schools? You want this? Like, what's wrong with you? And I can say that, 2.5 years later, it's kind of flipped. And we're seeing a backlash against the backlash kind of thing, whereas now people are kind of like, oh, these people, what I call the book banners, they're really causing trouble. They're really bad for our community. They're bad for our district. Kind of like we saw nationally, the Moms for Liberty last election kind of got backlash, and we're seeing that locally too, which I think is a good thing. The pendulum always goes both ways, and I think locally here we're hoping to land in a place of kind of normalcy, and we're not there, but we're closer. It's getting better. I can say that.
Kentucky, it's a mixed bag of complication because of a few things. We had Senate Bill 1 that passed a few years ago that effectively dissolved site-based councils, which were made up of teachers and parents who were in charge of curriculum. They no longer exist. Before that point, a Kentucky library was actually one of the safest places for a book because it actually required a convening of multiple committees. That is no longer the case. It is unclear what the library is by Kentucky law. We don't know if it's instruction or not. And so the case that you were talking about happened in Boyle County, Kentucky. They tried to ban 152 books, and we actually had the entire list of the books that were banned. And in that case, it was because of the students that we were able to fight back and win. And this is, I think, why we're not hearing as much about bans, even though they're bigger. Kentucky's a good example. Before Senate Bill 150, which is our anti-LGBTQ bill, passed, teachers were very vocal. People were very vocal. I think a lot of people were exhausted. And when that bill passed, it basically said, okay, you can't fight anymore. It's over. You've lost. The superintendent has power. And so now anyone who's being vocal is not, or any teacher being vocal is no longer just fighting some arbitrary legislator. They're fighting their own boss. So I think we're much less likely to see people speaking out about the individual books that are being banned because, one, it is more likely now that an administrator is claiming that the library is instruction and therefore they have the ability to remove books, or two, that people are watching it happen and are exhausted and feel like they've already lost this fight, and so they can't do anything about it. In that particular case, these students actually made an Instagram account and started posting about the books every single day. And then the students started posting about incidences of homophobia, transphobia, and racism in their school district that were being responded to by the district, which caused the district, which caused a lot of people to pay attention and a lot of op-eds to be written, and two, caused the district to back down and return the books. So that's my concern in general right now. It's that we don't even know what's happening because, just as you all mentioned earlier when we talk about making it even punishable for teachers, in this case, we haven't even gotten to the stage of criminalizing books, but we have gotten to the stage of teachers potentially losing their jobs for even talking about what's happening. And we're seeing a lot more silence. And the response that we've figured out here is to make sure students are talking. And then community members will absolutely come to the defense of students.
Well, I have to say that Pennsylvania has been a little sneakier than most other states. And I think that they're late to the game because they're sitting and watching. And it's one thing I have to say that is important, I think, to impress upon a lot of people who don't have a nationwide eye to what's happening, right? It seems like, well, that's not happening in my state. I don't really need to worry about that. I don't vote for those people. That's not my kid's school. But what starts to happen is a nice map of this starts to happen, and we can start to take the thread and connect it from state to state and state to state, and lay the legislation over one another, one over another, and they mirror one another. So our legislators aren't reinventing the wheel every time that they put one of these bills in a session. They're looking at what succeeds and looking at what the fights are, and they're replicating what works, and they're figuring out how to get loopholes into what didn't. In Pennsylvania last October, the Senate passed what they were calling an explicit content legislation, and the Democrats were fighting. We have a Republican Senate, but the Democrats were fighting, saying this is a book ban. They were saying, no, it is not a book ban. It just gives parents the right to have a look-see at this material and weigh in on what their kids are being exposed to in school. And again, the conversation about pornography. What is pornography? And I'm still waiting for somebody to show me how Tango Makes Three has pornography in it, but I'll be waiting until I'm a skeleton, I think. But it's even when read the book and we point out things, people don't want to hear those arguments, right? Like you said, that it's very polarized. It's either you're for it or you're against it. But what they're requiring in this particular bill, it was advanced, hasn't become a law, but it was advanced, and they said that it would require a signature from a parent that would be a consent form that would say that my child can interact with these type of materials, what they're calling sexually explicit materials. And most of the books on that list were not at all sexually explicit. When I looked to see exactly what was happening in Pennsylvania most recently, it looks like, ironically, most of the book bans that are on the books are happening in 3 districts out of the 501 in Pennsylvania. And one district that I'll just call attention to is in York County, which isn't too far away from here. And they had this big list of books that they tried to ban, and the community went wild. And Willie, very similar to your story about the kids fighting back, the kids in York County did the same thing and fought that battle themselves and said absolutely not. And the school board had to take that back and back down and not remove those books from the school. So here is telling us something really important, that kids getting involved in this and talking about why they need those books and why they shouldn't be removed and showing the real issues that those books are addressing is super important. And it really does have community impact and impact on the decision makers. So for people that think kids don't have impact. One more interesting thing to note about Pennsylvania, I know, Adrienne, you've been dealing with sneaky people walking through libraries, taking pictures, and little just crazy things happening in schools. Just as recently in this, in our schools up here in York County, this reporting was done by a paper called the York Dispatch by a team led by a good friend of mine, Wallace McKelvey. And they found through this email chain, there was this email called "Join Us at the Warehouse." And what they were doing is this right-wing group who are very involved with every harmful law that had to do with LGBTQIA bathroom policies or every harmful book banning policy that was happening in the central Pennsylvania area. This far right group, who was also involved with GOP candidates, is behind this one particular organization. And the organization is called Independence Law Center. And so it's not really just in central Pennsylvania, but it's all across Pennsylvania. So what their person was doing is sending these emails, and what they were writing in them is, remember, no more than 4 sunshine laws. So they were reminding those people in York County that you can only have 4 members from your board come to the secret meeting at the warehouse. Otherwise, you would have to open those records and tell the entire board and have that something that people in the district would know about. And so they were keeping something covert. They were keeping something secret, and they were, saying the quiet part out loud there. But they were outed when they were doing this, and people have been asking for what they've done there, and have not really been able to get a whole lot of transparency from them. They say, oh, it's not secretive. They were following the law. But what we know what the group is all about. We know who the group is affiliated with. We know what they've done in the past, and we know what the context of that email was, reminding them that it's something that they would not want the public to see. So those are the type of things that are happening. Now, the good thing is that the media was able to expose that. The bad thing is that once you expose it, they figure out a different way to do it. It's not quite out in the open anymore. So while it's a little bit less, maybe, and a little bit quieter in Pennsylvania, the same thing is happening here. So, once you start to dig into it, and what I find is far fewer people are complaining about it here in Pennsylvania. I'm not hearing people upset that we're
On
talking.
which side? On the
And there's just no one, like the right doesn't have to yell very loud because the left isn't fighting them. They're just not paying attention. It seems like they're doing these things and very few people are paying attention to it happening at all. Slipping right under the radar.
And that's how they took over so many school boards, in 2020 and 2021, is people were not paying attention. And that religious right kind of network, I mean, they're networked from state to state all over the country. They go by different names, but they're absolutely connected to each other. And the ones that aren't connected just copy the ones that are. So, the left or progressive, whatever you want to call it, we just don't have that. We don't walk lockstep with each other, and we don't organize that far out. It just doesn't exist. And unfortunately, they've been able to accomplish a lot. Those networks have been in place decades, some of them.
I think a lot of what is working for the right is they invent new things to get very upset about, or to upset other people about. So, it could be people from Middle Eastern countries one day teaching about racism the next, teaching about LGBTQ people the next. So progressives are always defending and never creating. And so, when we talk about a candidate not having a policy, it's because our policy is usually trying not to let things get destroyed. And you're absolutely right about the networking. The semester that I left the classroom, it was due to adults in my community who were actually doxing my former students, putting them in extremely unsafe conditions. There were death threats. They had to be removed from their homes. We found out much, much later that it was actually a group in Tennessee who came to our town because they realized, oh, there is a gay teacher of the year in a small town. So there were all of these networks working together to try to stop progress anywhere they saw it.
Yeah, that's absolutely despicable to me. Like, that's one of the most horrific things that I've seen them do, is just target specific teachers, target specific schools. And because they are so networked, and their numbers look much bigger than they actually are. But they've destroyed people's lives and they don't care, And you're right. They do pick up, they see what works. They try different things and they see what works. And when they get a hold of something like the porn, groomer, all that stuff, it's just, they just pound it into the ground. And then your average person that's not, most people, unlike myself, have a life and they're doing things outside of politics or local politics, so they're not, what they're hearing is, oh, the schools have porn in the library. Why do they should take that out. The average person, that's what they're picking up from it. Because their messaging is just, it's just so unrelenting, I guess is the word. And they test different things. They see what's going to really work. If you notice, they really pick up on with the LGBTQ, gay marriage is legal. Most people, even on, Republicans or people on more conservative, have a gay family member or a gay kid, and they're more accepting of that lifestyle than, in times past. So now it's all about trans. It's like, we're going to pick on the trans people. We're going to, this tiny population of marginalized people, and we're just going to blow that up to where it is the biggest problem in the country right now. In Texas, Ted Cruz is running ads that say, keep males out of female sports, keep the, trans, whatever. He's running commercials that say this, and a news story came out, I think from the Texas Tribune, that said that they tested what resonated with Texas voters, conservative Texas voters, and it wasn't the border, it wasn't the economy, it was LGBTQ and attacking trans people. So I don't know. I just find that so distressing. I wish I had some answer like, oh, okay, well, this is how we fix that. But it's just pure bigotry, that certain sides of the political aisle have moved from marginalized group to marginalized group, and that seems to work for them, and they keep doing it.
But and it's all activating the fear response, right? And it's how different this person is from you, and how different their lifestyle is, or look at this terrible, horrible thing that you don't understand because I have used hyperbole to the nth degree to talk to you about this thing, or I have outright lied. Like, for instance, there are no abortions after birth. Those type of, but there are people out there talking as if that is a real thing. And, there are some, when you talk about those strategy meetings that the right has, where they just start throwing things against the wall to see what's going to stick. And that's how they ended up on this crusade against trans communities. And they're really getting the bang for their buck on that one. And the other day, my husband was reading through some political pieces here, and there's a candidate that I don't remember which one, but the ad was talking specifically about bathroom policies. And the wording of the ad was particularly malicious. It was like, we have to keep men out, or no, it wasn't bathrooms, it was sports. We have to keep grown men out of girls' sports. Well, why not like boys and girls, or men and women? Because grown men aren't playing with girls. Mm-hmm. Those two things aren't together, but it has to be scary, right? You're not going to be scared if boys and girls are together. But if scary men are with your young girls, and it's this thing that it just triggers something inside the lizard part of your brain, right? So, and that's where they're going with it, and it's terrible.
What particularly works here too is most of the conversation is about trans kids, and what we know worked when we talked about the gay rights movement. It was people meeting gay people, whether we're talking about in real life or even on television. I don't remember the stats now, but simply encountering a gay person in your day-to-day life dramatically increased the likelihood that you were supportive of gay marriage, which jumped from 30% in 2001 to like 70% in 2009. Television also helped. But when we talk about trans kids, there is no safe way for children to share their stories. So what we do is we take a group who can't share their stories, and then we put them into situations where by the time they are able to share their stories, they're now adults, which again twists this idea of adult and child. It's ruthless, it's mercenary, and it's smart because they pick the one group that can't use the solutions that have been used before.
Right. And if you talk to the parents, if the parents speak up for the kids, then they get blasted for, oh, you're trying to change your children's sex at school or whatever. The stuff is so ludicrous. I mean, talk about having to defend stuff. You think like, how can you like defend this? Of course, nobody believes it, but people do believe it. It's, no parent out there. I consider myself pretty left leaning, and no parent is looking at their toddler and thinking, oh, I want this child to be trans. Like it's just not a thing. But that's, people believe that. They really do.
And we could go back 20 years and see the same arguments that people were trying to intentionally make their kids gay. They recycle over and over the same arguments. And Lisa, you're right. It is definitely about fear. And part of the difficulty is when you want someone who is so heavily guarded, because any person who doesn't know what trans means, who's being told someone's trying to harm your kid, who is a just regular person trying to go about their day, probably isn't going to have the time to learn about what sex is, what gender is, what trans means. The easiest, swiftest, safest thing for them to do is to attack the thing they think is trying to harm their kid, right? And the only way that you can combat that is to be extremely vulnerable with those sorts of people. And again, it's impossible to make a kid be vulnerable, which is why they're trying to ban books, because the books create an avenue, even if it's a fictionalized account, for someone to understand what a trans child is. And so banning the book prevents that from ever happening.
And I think of all the times I've read a book and connected with the character in the book, connected with the story, and cried, for the story that was happening. And that develops empathy. And if our kids are in school reading those stories and developing empathy, they're going to be able to interact with all types of people around them in much better ways. And it's crazy that people are trying to stop this from happening. And it blows my mind a little. I'm still talking to one person in my family, a pretty close relative, at least 3 times. I've had to have the same conversation that no, there are not kitty litter boxes in the bathrooms at schools. There never have been. There never will be. But the neighbor told her. And I said, I understand the neighbor told you, but I'm going to tell you, don't listen to your neighbor, because that's not true. And then I asked, where? Tell me where, and let's go there. Let's go there to look at the bathroom. I bet you they will show us. But it's really hard. And the problem here now lies is that the I don't want to say the word victim, but kind of victim of all of this politicizing, all of this polarizing, all of these bad policies, all of this fear are the kids that are in schools right now. And so what do we do as activists, trying to shield kids who are in school? They have one education. They have these years one time. We can't fix anything that happens now. So what do we do right now to help them get through this the best we can?
Well, I think in my community, I've tried to just kind of create awareness. And of course, it's not just me, but creating awareness so that the community knows what's happening. We didn't have any LGBTQ groups, so I started kind of a community meetup group. It's mostly adults, but sometimes kids come. And our schools, talking about the students getting involved, when that happened in 2022, a group of students formed the first Gay Straight Alliance Club at the high school. So I think creating awareness, making sure that that we have visible examples of allies, and that there's people in the community that support them. Also, just as far as the curriculum, we have a big curriculum fight going on in Texas. We have to have people that go to the state house and testify, and all that good stuff, which sometimes is just exhausting, and you do feel like you're just running on a treadmill. Nothing's going to happen, but you have to push back, even if it's just to get it on record. Otherwise they just steamroll through everything that they want to do. So I think creating awareness, building those relationships in your community, building relationships with your school board, your principals, knowing the teachers, all that um, is a must. And unfortunately, it's really hard for a lot of parents because they work, you know? So I hope that I can fill the gap for some people in our community between, getting the information out and trying to stay on top of. We talked about like the secret meetings, and it made me think about how much stuff in our community has gone on that people just don't know about. And it's kind of up to the people in the community to almost act as the media and using social media to get this information out, because they're not, most towns don't even have a local newspaper anymore. And if they do, they can't afford to do like investigative journalism. So it's kind of up to us to do that for our community.
One, I completely agree with everything that you just said. I think something that I know to be true is that the same school boards that are right now banning books were the school boards that bought them 10 years ago. There are a couple of people who have changed, but for the most part, school administrators are, in my humble opinion, neither more likely or less likely to care about LGBTQ rights or Black and brown students' rights. For the most part, they just want things to be calm. It doesn't mean that they're actively trying to harm or help any student. It just means that they want calm because they haven't had it for a long time. And what the right is really good at is making noise. But I can tell you that in the last year of advocacy work that we've done in Kentucky, every single county where we have been able to simply communicate really early on the effect of, are you actually doing this? Surely we're misunderstanding, and letting them know why this is bothering us or why this is inappropriate. The school has backed down and changed its mind, because our Senate Bill 150 actually left a lot of interpretation because the Department of Education did not agree with the legislation. And so they always back down, with the exception of one case where, because of a small caveat, we weren't allowed to speak. And so in that case, the school won. So that there we learned, if you communicate, and it doesn't have to be something loud, simply emailing the school saying, is this true? Are you doing this? Are you banning a book? This is what we've heard. 2 or 3 parents is enough to stop that in its tracks, because they're only banning the books because they think that will prevent problems. But if you're causing the problem by banning, that will that's when that will itself be a problem for them. I think another thing is really believing that you have the capacity to fill the gaps, because you do. I do not have any background in the sort of things that I've been doing, but what I've learned is people are so desperate right now to help. I mean, at least half of the country, usually more, are interested in preventing books from being banned, or interested in making sure kids have access to books at libraries. So we've built about 4 LGBTQ freedom libraries just in the last year in Kentucky in various communities, just by saying, hey, this is what we're doing. Can we get some help? I've seen parents organize LGBTQ proms. I've seen book drives to buy books by Black and brown authors. And I think we got like $3,000 for that. So in any case where you see that there's a need, I think if anyone out there is listening and thinking like, I don't really know what I could do, I promise you, any little idea that you have, if you put that out there, people are going to want to help and connect. And so figure out what that is, because you probably would want to help and connect if someone said, hey, we're trying to get some books, or hey, we're trying to build a curriculum and just need some donations. So realize that other people would do that for you as well.
Right. And we don't forget, I may not have the resource that you want, but I may know somebody who does. So we have people out there who are connectors, and, put people together who need to be together. I just got an email just last week from one of my first students, in one of those very first classes I taught way back. And, she was at an event, and it was, something around this type of topic because she has ended up working for a nonprofit and doing a lot of work around education justice and book banning and those type of things, and sent me an email. One of those like emails that former teachers love to get, years and years later about all the, the great things that you never get told, enough. But I was watching some of the work that she's been doing, and through this nonprofit, and also through a UCC church. So you find these things sometimes in unlikely places to help kids and community, and they're doing the neatest events. Where they're doing like wine events around book banning to bring awareness to it. Or they did just last night or the night before, they did a book banning bingo, and they were going through and like playing bingo with the names of banned books. They're doing really creative events to bring awareness to the community for adults and kids to talk about the issues in a fun way. And, good timing too, because, it's election time and it's, book banning week. But now, before we have to wrap up our conversation, I want to talk to you as the election leads up. What is your take on social media today for both adults and kids? But I think mostly for kids. How do we teach our kids in a world where it's difficult to have conversations with adults about media literacy on the internet? How do we teach our kids to be better digital citizens on social media? Any thoughts on that?
Well, I think that the kids, they probably know more than we do. How do we teach our boomers is what I want to know. But I mean, it is important, especially with like, oh my gosh, you hear those horrible stories about kids getting blackmailed, getting, sent pictures. So there's that kind of awareness that you always have to instill in your children. But then also, like we just had a couple weeks ago with that story with the Russians paying these, podcasters to spread their propaganda. I mean, that's scary because you think about, how far could that go? Could it go into kids, games like Roblox or, Snapchat or, so I think it's just really important to keep control and keep watch of what your kids are consuming on there. And make sure that their time is limited and make sure that they're aware that almost nothing on the internet is real. Like they're smart to be skeptic about anything, and that they can come to you if they have questions about something that they're seeing, on the internet about, especially regarding, school or government or anything like that, because especially during election time, there's a lot of forces out there that are giving competing narratives.
I think, and when we talk about narratives as well, I don't think there is a good narrative for how we create an internet that is safer for children. Because the only narrative, because again, the typical way that we see things is, the right wing attack on something and then the left wing response to it. And so I think we've seen a lot of censorship proposed of the internet by the right, and then a sort of generalized left no to censorship. But when I think about what is on even Instagram or Facebook, if I had a child, I would not probably let that child before the age of 16 touch social media. But I know this is not what other people are doing. And I can say that because I don't have a child. If I had a child, I can not even imagine how much pressure it would be to be like, oh, you're going to be the only kid for the next 5 years who doesn't have a phone. But I think the left has to start articulating some ideas for how we can create a safer internet for children. And I don't have the tech savvy to do that. But while we have it in this current form, I think it has to be highly watched. And I think, when I think about what media literacy looked like even 10 years ago, when we were teaching it to young people, it has to start with teaching them that every single thing that they are looking at has a purpose that is not being stated, and helping them learn to articulate what that purpose is. When I think about, my nephews watching these extreme right wing, the kind of men who say the word alpha, I can only imagine what all of their formative years spent watching that stuff does to how they think about women, how they think about themselves, how they think about roles in the society, how they think about worth and individuals' worth. And it would take decades of deprogramming to pull somebody away from that. So it's a dangerous time.
Yeah, and I think that, when we started talking about this particular topic at EdPost, one thing that popped into my mind was it's first of all, parents, because you're regulating that phone and you're regulating that social media. So you have to be that first line of attack and talking to kids about what's real and what's false. And like Adrienne, like you said, that, being the person that they feel like they can ask the questions, like, is this real? What's this all about? And being able to be the person that can answer some of those questions. But it also falls to our schools. It falls to the teachers, where there are lessons to be taught here about what you're seeing online, and how to determine validity, how to determine what is a good source of information, and how to verify that source, and not just throwing it away, like you said, Willie, not just throwing it away if it's something that's not exactly true, but trying to talk about, like, well, who would want this narrative out there and why? What do they stand to gain by putting this out there, even though it's not true or it's not entirely true? And get people really critically thinking about what they're seeing on the internet, so that we pause before we share somebody's propaganda, and we pause before we fall hook, line, and sinker for somebody's narrative, just because it hits the button of something that confirmation bias, something that we want to believe. Now, how does AI make this even more complicated?
Well, I think that we're just beginning, just beginning to figure that out. It's kind of like, when I remember growing up, when the internet, we just started using the internet, and you could get into some trouble in some chat rooms or things like that. And now with AI, it's a whole different, it's almost like a new internet. And we don't have the answers yet. That's kind of what's scary is what's going to be possible in 5, 10, 15 years with AI, let alone what can be done with it now. It's kind of scary.
I think it's when we talk about how it's built, it is racist and homophobic and sexist because our culture is racist, homophobic, and sexist. It's built on being fed narrative and then using that narrative to create new narrative. And if you want to test it, go to any of the content generating AIs and ask it to invent a tribunal of elders. It will only invent men. Ask it to tell love stories. It will only tell straight love stories. That's sort of the problem that we're going to see is it's already trained and now it's creating all new information. It's creating all the new narratives. I think I read that 60% of the things that you read online are actually written by AI. So AI is now feeding itself and learning from itself. So I worry that whatever arc of justice humanity had created ends here. Because we're not going to be creating new narratives if we're building off of only old ones. So I think that's one pretty scary thing. Another thing is when I think about probably the way that we're going is the AI will be very individualized and it's going to learn things about us and it's going to tell us the stories we want to hear. It's going to interact with us the way we want to be interacted with because its goal is not to make us better or stronger. Its goal is to get us to interact more. And so if AI thinks you're homophobic, it has no interest in then trying to present you with narratives that change that model. If it thinks you're racist, it has no interest in changing that. And unlike at least the internet, where we could see, because the internet itself is, the algorithm is showing you racist things because you're racist or showing you sexist things because you're sexist, you at least knew these are people who are making these things and I can choose to look at them or not. But now this voice that is like the third person omniscient narrator of all information is itself being racist with you. That's going to have really scary consequences. And when we think about our young people, it is deciding who they are really early on, and then it's keeping them exactly where they are. It's really built to prevent us from progressing.
Wow, that kind of the arc of justice that really blew my mind a little bit there. But you're exactly right. If it's feeding into itself, where does the narrative have a chance to go? Whew. All right, I have one last question, and that is, all of these things that we're talking about, and all of the work that you all are doing every day. It all has to start somewhere. It all has to start with one small action. And we talk to people all the time at EdPost who say, I want to get involved. I want to do something, but, how am I going to have any impact? What is putting one video online going to do? Or how can one person, make a difference? And I think both of you probably have something to say to those people. I'm wondering if either of you or both of you have an example of a time when you did something small that had a really big impact that maybe will inspire some others to do some of their own advocacy moving forward.
I'll go ahead. I've worked in elections for, 6 years, like just my local elections, doing like the poll worker. And like I said, I've been my county chair, and I've always had people complain to me about they'll go to vote, and they'll say they weren't registered. And I'd say, did you register online? They'd say yes. So I did a little investigating and found out that Texas had this really deceptive voter registration site, the state of Texas, where you were able to fill out a form that kind of went nowhere. And it was, it let you submit the form with a submit button. And at the bottom, in fine print, it says print and mail in. So I realized that all these people were every election thinking they were registered to vote, and they weren't. And we don't have same day. We have to register 30 days in advance. So once they got to the polls to vote, they're not registered. It's too late for them. They can't vote. So this site was actually taking away people's voice and vote. So anyways, I've had a bugaboo about that site, and I've talked about it several times on social media. But last month, I think it was last month, time is going fast and really slow at the same time. I made a video just talking about the site, which I've done before, but something about it hit. I don't know, and it got spread all over. There was celebrities sharing it. And within like a week, the state of Texas changed the website to make it less deceptive. So that was a little thing I did. Most of my political, like my videos that are strictly about voting, like 20 people watch them because, it's kind of boring. But for whatever reason, that one hit. And it really did make a change. And I'm so excited about it because I think, oh my gosh, how many people are going to be able to vote this time that would have been tricked by that website, that are now aware, and not just because of the video, but because it actually spurred a change with the Secretary of State's office to change this deceptive site. So that's one instance of something that I personally did and saw a big result from.
So you just never know. You just got to keep going. You never know when the thing is going to take off and make a big difference. And, you're telling 20 people every time you're doing one of those videos. So it's 20 more people than knew before.
Right, exactly.
That next video is going to be the one that is going to blow up. And it really made a difference. Well, congratulations. That's awesome. Willie, what do you think?
I can think of just a few. I heard about a school that was actually going to force teachers either to out students or to contact Child Protective Services if they were afraid to out the student to their parent. Basically, all teachers had to out them to someone. And I just called Child Protective Services and was like, "Can I speak to the president of this at the state level?" Because I thought, why not? What can I lose? And I got a meeting, and I was like, "Here's what the school district is planning to do," and they were like, "Oh, no, 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 no. We don't want that. We will not respond to that." And I literally just said, "Can I cite you?" And they said, "Yes." So I sent a single email and said, "Hey, I've already spoken to them. They absolutely do not think this is the right idea." And we were able, like that, to kill that policy, a policy that would have caused a lot of harm. I had some students who gave me a stack of pen books, and they said, "Hey, can we make a little tiny library of LGBTQ books because we think it's good for people's mental health?" And I encouraged them to apply for a grant. So they asked for $400. The grant makers were so impressed with these kids that they responded and said, "Ask for more." And so the kids asked for $9,987, and they got it. And that grant not only bought $4,000 in books, but it actually helped them have a queer rural youth summit in Kentucky. Their school rejected their books, but a local art center said, "We'll take them." And so then we asked on GoFundMe for just $400 more so that if anyone ever wanted a book and they weren't within walking distance, they could have it mailed. And GoFundMe itself noticed the GoFundMe, topped it off, and then contacted the media. We ended up having 7 different media spots about this. We ended up raising thousands of dollars. And with that money, there is now a queer youth or a Rainbow Freedom Library in Montgomery County, in Clark County, a place called the Sapling Center in Knott County, Kentucky, in extreme rural Kentucky called and said, "Hey, can we get in on this?" So we were like, "Let's do it." So we were able to then just ask for some more money and able to create another one. That Queer Youth Summit was so successful that a local university was like, "Hey, we can host you if you want to do another one." So we now have our second Rural Queer Youth Summit for another group of rural queer youth. And what's great about all of this is it was some students who said, "Here are $15 worth of books. Can we start a little library?" There's a library in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale. It's called the Stonewall Library. A 17-year-old boy came out to his parents in the 1970s, and they accepted him. And then what? Because there was no community, there was no world for him. So they bought him some books. And when he had about 20 books, he said, "I want to name this something." And the only gay word he knew was Stonewall. So he named it the Stonewall Library. It is now the largest LGBTQ library on planet Earth. It is the largest receptacle of queer reality and history on planet Earth. So the biggest challenge we have is really just doing the thing, because that little thing is going to ripple, like you said, in ways that you can't imagine. And maybe not every project is going to become the world's largest LGBTQ library, but it could become a fun event for kids, and it could become a moneymaker for a special cause that helps you meet community.
Wonderful. Well, I know that you both have things you've got to get to and you've got to run, but thank you both so much for taking the time to be here today and for all the work you're doing in your respective states to fight the book bans and everything else, fight the harmful laws for kids in schools. And for all of you out there watching, this has been Always Learning. And if you like this episode, please do like, share, follow, and join us again for our next episode.
Thank you.
Thank you.